Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the V8ESC Backfire podcast. And with me tonight, I have my usual two sidekicks, season 1 and 2 champion Tony Cluse,
Good afternoon from the colonies.
and season 5 champion and current championship leader Johnny Brand.
Evening from the civilized world.
Well, it's good to see that everybody reads my posts on Facebook. That's a good start. It's a shame everybody didn't read the rules, but never mind. So tonight we have our usual race review from last night's racing at Alton Park. Lots and lots and lots to talk about from there. We'll also be naming our drivers of the meeting as our little fun way of putting us guys on the spot. We've also got our guest driver, Chris Jackson, coming in tonight. Chris is going to talk about the dark art of tyres and tyre pressures with the V8. After that, we'll do a preview of the next round from Daytona with our endurance race. We've got a little bit of league news for you to keep you up to date. There's a little bit of iRacing news. And then, as per last week, guys and girls, if you want to pop some questions into the chat, we'll do our best to answer them as honestly as we possibly can. One other thing, we've also got Sam Boozin working the magic in the background. We don't let him talk. If you ever heard him talk, you'd understand why. Tony, Johnny, Alton Park Fosters, tight, twisty, incident strewn, shall we say?
Thank God that's how it comes to mind.
Yeah.
When can we go again?
Yeah, but I thought you'd say that.
So in my notes, I've got driving standards, post-race bitching, stand-ins, driver abuse. Let's start with the actual review. Tony, you was very, very quick round here. You had your fair share of incidents in the second and third races. What's the secret to Alton Park Fosters?
Practice, and I think a bit of a setup. I have to admit, I have an awful lot of laps here, and I'm talking in the thousands. Not just in preparation for this weekend, but over the 5 or 6 years that we've been racing. So regardless of the layout here at Alton, I think that the setup remains very, very similar throughout. And you need to be aggressive here. There's no question about it. I had one incident in race 1 or race 2 with George, which I've sent him an apology on. May have been a little opportunistic on my part, but I haven't had an opportunity to talk to George. But I think if he takes a look at it, it'll look like a bit of a racing incident. No incidents in race 3, which was good, and just some really, really hard racing. And Johnny was within arm's length of me there for a bit, but trying to get past Harold and Mick Mueller was difficult. They raced really hard. I don't blame them for the way they raced, and it was just difficult, and Johnny was able to gap us. So good on Johnny. He made an excellent pass there to get by both of those guys, and he was able to gap it. But I like the track. I know it does create an opportunity for some chaos, and if we take a look back at some of the incidents, I don't think we have anything with intent. I think that we have some slip-ups, and it's very easy to do on this track.
Yeah, indeed it is. Johnny, so Sprint Series last weekend, you seemed to struggle.
I did struggle.
There was
Yeah.
there was talk of sandbagging at the time, I remember.
There was talk of crying in our Discord once we saw Tony.
Yeah, race one. You stuck with Tony for a little bit, and then Tony seemed to get a gap on you. And then I don't. I think it may have been Harold. You had an incident with. I think in race three.
Race two.
Race
two.
Race two was it?
Yeah.
It was race two or race three. I know from my perspective, you were slow and in front of me, and I did actually make the comment on our Discord channel that's the first time I've ever had to complain that Brandon is slowing me down.
That was race two because I'm on race three.
Right, okay, I'm looking at the wrong results then. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is you managed to find some pace from somewhere. From leading from what Tony was saying, what was that? Did you just put hundreds of laps of practice in, or did you find something with the setup? Did the track just click with you all of a sudden? What gave you that bit of extra pace?
A little bit of both. I mean, I don't think I showed my actual, but I don't think the gap was as big as it looked from the sprint series. Tony was rapid in the sprint series, and I'd say he was probably about 4 to 5 tenths quicker a lap, not the 8 tenths that it was. And after 2 laps, 3 laps, he had a second and a half on me, and I just thought, you know what, there's no way I'm catching. I'm just going to get no incursions. So I gave up the chase of Tony. It was just a pointless exercise that would only have ended badly for me in the sprint series. The plan was to practice and do hundreds of laps all week and find out what's going on with the setup. The problem with that was it was 38 degrees all week, pretty much, and I couldn't get on my rig. So we did probably about an hour, or maybe an hour and a half on Monday night. And then we did about an hour and a half on Friday night. And Friday night was probably the one where we made a small change that made quite a big difference, which was quite surprising. And when I say a big difference, I'm talking probably about 2 temps.
So, what was the change, Johnny?
It was in the setup, Tony.
A little bit more specific, some of our listeners may be.
It was ARBs. It was ARBs. We changed
Okay.
the ARBs to something we never run. I'm not going to say exactly what we did, but it was it completely changed the feel of the car. And suddenly, we were quite close. And I messed up. I got so in qualifying, I thought I was going to have you. And I was so close, I put myself off. I missed my second lap, and the second lap was always quicker than the first lap. And the time I did was a first lap time at the end of the session, first lap of the run. So suddenly we were all excited and thought, oh, we can get close here. And then you proceeded to pull away and disappear a couple of seconds down the road in the first race. But you had a little wobble for a minute and give us a little bit of hope, but you still had that pace.
Yeah, don't worry, Tony. I'll get the information out of Foggy. I just have to offer him donuts.
Foggy can't remember what it was anyway. He's forgotten by Saturday morning. He drives that many cars.
So just looking back to race one, we had some new drivers for the main series, some old returning drivers. Jamie, train announcer McKnight for one. In the end, it was the usual suspects at the top. And then we go into race two with our new reverse wheel that Marco managed to cock up again. Now, some people don't like the reverse grids. Some people love them. The reverse wheel so far this season has thrown up some big reverse grids. From a front runner point of view, like you two, how nerve-wracking is it coming from the back of the grid trying to pass idiots like me?
Well, Johnny's waiting for me to go first, I guess. It is nerve-wracking, I guess. I think you just need to pick your spots. Generally, I have a really good start and can pick up a couple of spots there. And then yesterday, I tried to let things settle down a little bit, and you got to take your opportunities. What happened in, I think, all three races was that we had a lot of people departing the track, and that just created easy passing opportunities.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd agree with that. There's
yeah,
a lot
there
of
was a
people
couple
that,
of bits in race three, weren't there? I do remember nearly wetting myself seeing Rich Warmingham half buried in the barrier, and then there was another one. I think Chris Jackson and about 3 or 4 other cars started by Mick Muller coming together. And the seas parted in front of me, and I made about 6 places. But that is the sort of thing that can happen in these large reverse grids sprint races where you've got to get stuff done as quickly as possible, Johnny. Yeah.
yeah, a little bit. I think it was a little bit accentuated with Alton Park because it's half a lap, so the gaps between each of the drivers is half the gap it usually is. So if you're normally a second a lap quicker than somebody in the field, you're only half a second a lap quicker than them here. So it makes a big difference. It was a lot harder in that respect. However, I think race 2, Foggy and myself started way down like 20th or something. And we were up in second and third, and we probably only overtook 4 cars. Everybody else drove off the circuit and in front of us just got involved in their own actions. And I know people say, "Oh, it's the reverse grids cause carnage with the fast guys coming through." I don't think. I think it was the mid-pack guys getting involved with each other yesterday and just pushing themselves off the track, and the fast guys just driving past them whilst they were recovering. It's certainly what it was for me and Foggy mainly, and I think it was the same at the last round as well. Definitely in the first reverse race. So it's funny how people automatically think it's the fast guys being impatient, but in reality, I think there's a lot of argy-bargy going on in that midfield that gets reversed.
I'd agree with you there, Johnny. I think the reverse grids are great. I think that they add an awful lot to the broadcast. I know that if I start 20th and end up, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, I've done a good job. And I think everyone has to remember that all the fast guys at the back not only have to deal with each other, they have to deal with everybody else at the same time. So it's pretty intense back there. So
My biggest sorry, Tony. My biggest fear, if you like, is getting caught up in somebody else's incident. It's not thinking, oh my god, I have to pass all these people. It's getting past the inevitable midfield incident for me, if I'm being honest.
I think a lot of the incidents in the midfield are probably weirdly a strength of the series because the midfield is, so congested now. You've got the usual suspects up the front, and the usual suspects at the back, and then the rest of us are usually separated by half a second.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think when they're trying to get past the tail enders of race 1 that are starting at the front, I think that's when it can get a bit unpredictable. And because they're all so tightly packed, I think that's where the drama occurs.
Yeah, and I also found with this track as well, I wouldn't say it is just this track. There are a few like it, but a lot of tracks, if you go into a corner too deep, the corner's fairly wide, you can recover and still get a good drive off. But here it seemed to me that if you was a fraction too late on the brakes and went too deep into the corner, there was just no grip out there, and somebody that's braking in the right place just turned in on the inside of you and got better traction, and away they went. And I think with people over driving and going into the corners too hard, I think that's where a lot of the problems were coming from.
just having a look at qualifying yesterday, guys. Between 6th and 22nd, there was 1.1 seconds difference, less than 1.1 seconds. So the group is tightening up significantly, and I think you're right. Everyone is equal or very close to equal in that group, and you're going to have a lot closer racing because of that.
Yeah, most definitely. And race 3, we can talk about Johnny winning it, but we won't because that's boring. I got
It's not
top
that
10.
boring. I really don't mind if you want it. Carry on.
Yeah. So we had there were some really good drives in that.
Thanks, bud.
Not ignoring Victor's 22 place gain, but Foggy was up 16 in this one. Victor again up another 14 places. I think he's now leading the Fred Bingham Forever Forward Award. That race 3 seemed to have everything. It had fast guys coming from the back to the front. It had incidents. That it was just one of those races that there was always something going on. And I finished watching the broadcast probably half an hour ago. And I know sometimes I feel sorry for them commentators because they can't keep up with everything.
There was definitely a lot going on yesterday. It was. I watched the broadcast last night, and yeah, it looked exciting wherever you were. I think that's also one of the pluses of Alton Park. I think it's a short, sharp circuit, and very, very difficult to overtake. So generally speaking, I think people did well. And like you say, for people like Tanaka and Foggy to make up all those places, it's pretty impressive. I did make them all up, but then one bad move, I lost 10 of them. So yeah, that's the problem.
I think Chris makes a good point here in the chat about starting the race on cold tires. I don't know about you, Johnny, but it was end of lap 2 or beginning of lap 3 before our tires really came in well.
Yeah, I mean that's just a given for me now. It's take it easy, that one on the tires. It's the trouble is if you your odds on going to have a problem with the tires at the start of the race because they're cold. But if you do have a problem with them, it punishes you for more than the rest of that lap. You can, in my opinion, you can damage that tire almost, whereby you start sliding around too much lap 1. I won't be able to get within 3/10 of the times I should be doing for the rest of the stint.
Yeah, there's definitely...
Regardless of letting them cool down or anything like that, I think you can really harm it at the start in these.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know if everybody is aware of that. And when building setups, you need to build a setup that's going to last more than one lap or that performs better as the laps go on, as opposed to having one lap set up and then having it fall off from there.
Yeah, I'll try and get a setup that, you obviously get one where you're comfortable over one lap, but as soon as I've got one that I'm comfortable over the one lap, very first thing I do is do 6 to 10 laps and then do it again, see what the drop-off rate is, see if the setup's lasting, and compare it to the other set if you're trying it against 2. If you've got 2 different ones, see what the same drop-off is. It's very hard in the league practice sessions because you have the dynamic weather on. So what we do is turn that off in our own private sessions. So at least the track is consistent. So it's a lot easier to see what the car and the tyres are doing.
Well, that sort of leads nicely on to the driving standards part of the race review. 3 major things that I pick out that I class under driving standards. Number 1 is start of the race, cold tyres. A lot of the time you see people driving like they've already done 10 laps and the car is just, handling totally different. Number 2, again, start of the race, and braking points. You know, people have been practice. They've got their braking points down to a T, and then all of a sudden there's 15 cars in front of them that are all braking, and everybody has to brake that little bit earlier. And then one guy doesn't and causes carnage. And the third one, which is usually the most annoying from me, not that I do it, but it happens to me a lot, is the dive bomb from a different postcode. You know, what can we, you know, is there anything we can do about it? Is it just education? Do we remind people at the start of every race, you know, what to expect? You know, it's a real tricky one, guys. What do you think?
I think it's. See, you say tyres, cold tyres. I don't know if people realise, but the brakes are cold as well. So it's not just you don't get the braking efficiency because the tyres aren't hot. It's because the brakes are cold as well. So I literally warm up my brakes on my out laps and things like that if I'm doing quali as much as I will warm up the tyres, if not more. And that's definitely a factor at the start of the races. So sometimes you might see if you behind me in quali or behind me at the start of a race, I might have my brake pedal on going down the straight. So you might see my brake lights on. It's because I'm just trying to shade the brake in certain areas to try and warm them up a bit.
That's
I
why
don't
you're
think
so
I'm
slow.
crazy with that. I'm convinced that's a thing. As far as what can you do to deter it, the only way you deter it is penalties for me. I think you can try education, but then that's never going to cure it. I don't think people want to do it, whether it's mistakes. I'm all for mistakes, but if it's the same person making those same mistakes every week, and I'm not saying anybody is, but I'm just using that as an example, then there's a problem. That's not a mistake. So maybe it needs to be looked at to see who it is and what's going on, and it might be an idea to have a sort of marshalling system looking at the broadcast afterwards, just not to cover every incident, but just to try and see regular issues. If they're from regular people, you know, the same people making the same mistakes, and then have a quiet word somewhere, might be an idea. But yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, you know, on the whole, I don't think the driving standards are bad. I do think a lot of the incidents that we have in races are drivers making a genuine mistake. But like you say, it does get annoying when it's the same drivers making the same mistakes race in, race out.
Yeah, that's not, you know, they're not mistakes then. That's just poor driving. If it's from the same person, you're just doing something wrong all the time. You know, that's poor decisions for me.
I think Johnny's right. I think that we may need to rethink the penalty system for incidents. We were having a discussion before the broadcast on that, and it may be something that we will take offline and think about how the penalty points or the bonus points are assessed.
Yeah, well, that'll be one for the admin teams getting towards the end of the season. Obviously, you know, we won't try and change things mid-season, but I think that's definitely worth reviewing with the admin team and seeing if we can come up with something that will, as Johnny says, you know, we're never going to stop it, but if the penalties are harsh enough that people think twice before doing it, then you know maybe that will go a long way towards helping. The next thing is post race bitching. Now, yes, it's a touchy subject. I did get on my soapbox this morning about it. Made a rule change that hopefully everybody's clear on. It's not something that is you know, I watch a lot of racing leagues, and I'm a member of a few groups, and some of the Facebook pages and the chat and things like that, you look at it and you think, oh, this league must be for under sevens only. Now, we're not at that stage, and we're trying to nip it in the bud straight away. But what do you guys think? Should drivers be able to vent? Um, where do we take it? How far do we go? How much do we need to police this?
Well, I made my comments pretty clear on the board yesterday. My first thought when it comes to this is we have a sponsor that helps to fund our league, puts out an awful lot of money, and regardless of what anybody else thinks, we represent that sponsor. And I don't want anything to happen that is going to put that sponsorship in danger for either this year or future seasons down the road. Very difficult to get that kind of sponsorship. Clyde did an awful lot of work on it, and it's a free league. So, let's try and act like mature adults. I don't think we have anybody under the age of 18 or 19 here. And
Is it actual or mental?
I'm talking actual. But really, you know what? Heat of the moment, stuff happens. But as has been said many times, we said it on the podcast last week, we mentioned it yesterday again, just shut up, review the incident, and then have a discussion with someone. It's not that difficult.
See, I completely agree, 100% with all of that, Tony. At the same time, I'm a little bit old school, whereby I quite like the idea of getting these things out in the open and discussed so that they're dealt with, and they're not festering until 2 weeks later when someone wants to get their own back because they got the ump with that person. I think it's a good thing to talk about these things and get them out in the open and sort them out. And I also think sometimes it's better to do that out in the open and get some opinions from people that weren't involved. Because if me and you, Tony, we have an incident, I send you a private message, what did you do that for? You turned in on me. No, I didn't, Johnny. You were too aggressive again and threw it up the inside. I left you space. It just goes nowhere. We'll have a private message match where we both think each other's to blame, and it doesn't go anywhere. If you can have somewhere to have that discussion as opposed to argument, and maybe get some input from some other people, I think they could go a long way to calming stuff down and getting things dealt with. But it needs to be done the right way, because it's no good having the petty insults.
Sorry, Tony, that was going to be my point. Is it's not the fact that I agree. People should be able to talk about it. It's the way you go about talking about it, and the posting of insults 30 seconds after you've been crashed out of a race. That's where I see the problem. And as as Tony sort of alluded to there, we've got a bloody world-class sponsor on board. How we've got it, I don't know. We are an attractive league. We're a niche league, and they're interested in what we do. But they've got access to our Facebook page, our broadcasts, our Discord channel, and it's not just the league sponsor as well. Teams have got sponsors, and I try and look at it from their point of view. If they was to come on and see those sort of comments, what light does that shine on us? It's not a very good one.
Yeah, all the telling each other to F off and blah 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 blah, and proper insults. I mean, again, I'm a bit old school like that. The old sticks and stones things. You can call me what you like on Facebook or on a forum. What you can tell me whatever you like. It really doesn't bother me. And there's a part of me that thinks if you're bothered because somebody's called you, whatever they're calling it, whatever we call each other on these things, if you're bothered by that, who really cares? You know, it's the person that's doing the name calling that should be embarrassed. When people start taking offence because they've been called names on forums and this, I really don't get it at all. But I do see what you're saying with the embarrassment thing. But maybe it should be whoever starts calling people names and we have a word with them. But I don't think we should discourage that conversation, because I think if there's an issue there, it's better to get the issues dealt with and get everyone to start again with clear air than it is to let it drag on. That's my thoughts on that.
There's a big difference between having a discussion and what transpired yesterday. What transpired yesterday is completely and utterly not acceptable.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've read all of that, so I can't really comment there. I'm sure you're right. If you're, I can tell from what you guys are saying, it doesn't sound good. But it shouldn't be done.
Okay, so we've covered that. We've, like I say, we've put a new rule in place. People have been spoken to today. People have apologised to me for comments made. So
maybe
we'll draw a line in the sand.
Can you not open a channel in the Discord that is only open to drivers or something? That you can call it the post-race discussion section. So nobody outside of the driver list can get into that, but you could have discussions in it. And there's still no insults. The same rules apply, but at least it's somewhere for people to have these discussions and put up their little videos and say, what do you think about it? And just have a little review of anything they're not sure of and the arguments, and people can say what they think in there without worrying about what offence it might be causing.
I think, to be honest, mate, I think that's what the Race Day channel is all about. It's not the we don't want people discussing incidents. It's the personal insults and that sort of thing that we want to stop.
Yeah, okay. So we're on the same page anyway.
Yeah. But, like I say, we've put a rule in place. Hopefully that'll stop it. Like I say, I have had some apologies today. We draw a line in the sand and we move on.
I have to say that we do personally insult each other in XVR as pretty common course, to be honest. Even in the mic chat.
Yeah, I must admit, Chris will probably back me up. I can't go a day without insulting Chris in our chat in NQR. So when it's done in jest, that's fine. It's when it gets personal that I see that there's a problem. I had a suggestion to me. Let's stop because you can close the chat down in the game during a race, but I like that option to be able to say sorry and thank you, and I can see you, Tony, go up the inside, or that sort of thing. I'm just hoping we've nipped it in the bud now.
Okay, let's move on.
Let's move on. So the bit that you both love, driver of the meeting. So what did we start? We started with Tony last time. Let's start with Johnny this time.
Driver of the meeting.
Yeah, taking all three races into account. Let's get somebody's name in lights and make their head swell for 5 minutes.
Really going to have to say probably Foggy for me. I know it's one of my teammates, but right up there in all three races. Didn't get involved in anything. What did he have? He had a third, a first, and a fourth. Starting third, 16th, and 20th.
Pretty shitty night for Foggy then.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he did pretty well there.
Okie dokie. Tony?
I'm going to pick somebody mid-pack that I thought was pretty impressive in a first season of racing with us. Ashley Beard had a podium in one of the races. fairly good finish in another, and then he had a poor race, I think, in race one. But overall, I think he performed very well. It was nice to see one of the new guys coming in and grabbing a podium right away.
There's a group of those guys from Excite that are all pretty good guys. So it'd be interesting to see how they progress there if they stick with it, which
looks like there's
I've
potential.
got the impression they will do. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm hoping they stick with it. Adam McNally has sort of been dipping his toe in and out of the series for a few seasons now, but now he's got some teammates. Let's hope they all get stuck in together and
Yeah,
get
we're going
better
to try
together.
and help them out as well. So we know them from other series, so hopefully they'll stick around. I think they will. That's the impression we get.
Good stuff.
Good. Right. So my driver of the day is going to be a bit of a different one. I'm going to go for a guy that has been with us from the start. Normally tends to struggle a bit. He won't mind me saying that. But got a 5th place in a 22-23 car grid. Ronald Moons. What a drive.
Yeah, that was a good drive there. Yeah.
I'm looking at that now. Only one incursion as well. That's pretty good go.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Ronald's one of them. Again, I don't mean to be harsh, but Ronald's usually one of those drivers that if something is happening on the track, he's usually involved in it. But I watched the replay today when I was looking at something else for somebody else, and he made one mistake in the whole race. Yeah, really good. Well done, Ronald. Right, so now it's time for our guest driver, Chris Jackson from NQR Holden. You all know Chris. He's been around pretty much from the start. He's been putting a lot, when I say a lot, I mean like hundreds of hours into trying to suss out the tyres on this car. So I've invited him in. I don't know what secrets he's going to let into, but we'll give him a grilling and see what happens. So let me drag him in.
He's going to tell us all he knows in 5 minutes.
Will it take that long?
Chris Jackson, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, gents. How's everyone doing?
Yep,
Chris.
We're all good. Right, you've got 30 seconds to tell us the secrets of tyres. Go.
I wish I could do it in 30 seconds, but hey.
Chris, take your time. I'm all ears.
So I was just telling our 14,000 viewers that we've got tonight about all the work that you've been putting into tyres, especially this season. So, tell us a bit about the work you've been doing, what you've been finding out, if there's anything that you can share that you don't want to keep just within the team. And, myself, Johnny and Tony will, try and fire some questions at you, get some more information out of you. And hopefully some of the guys in the chat will fire some questions as well that we can answer at the end.
Sounds good. We'll give it a whirl. Basically, where the work started was, and I think Tony can agree, is last season we saw a huge jump with Johnny and Nicole. They partnered up with Evolution Racing Team, and we noticed a big gap in their pace, whether it had to do a bit of setup, a bit of sharing of information, driver knowledge, etc. So we knew we had to put in some extra work, and that kind of was the catalyst or the driving force that really, and I kind of put my hand up to say, let's try and work with the team and try and develop some testing to really try and understand these tires, the car a bit more to see if we can bridge that gap. So that was the driving force. And then there was some good learnings that has taken place and it's ongoing. So if I start with it, there is no magic tire pressure. The old philosophy, I think, in the V8s, and I think Tony can attest to this, is we've been told you want to get the hot tire pressures to 26 PSI. And that was basically the goal of this car. and we kind of stuck to that pretty much until I think midway last year. Would you agree with that, Tony?
Yeah.
He's a man of many words.
So we started working on different stuff, and we started noticing, and Tony and I, as well as some of the other drivers, Victor was able to help out, and some of our team members, they drive other vehicles, and other vehicles typically have the trend of the lowest possible PSI seems to be the best, which isn't always the case in the V8, but sometimes it does work. So some of the things I'll share with the group, and we can have some questions. I give some philosophy on this, but it seems like, and Johnny actually touched on it before, when they do practices, they eliminate the dynamic weather so that you can really focus on the information that you're collecting or that you're gathering throughout a session, because as the weather changes, the sun comes out, if more cars are on the track, that changes everything, and what you're feeling and experiencing though isn't applicable to what you're trying to find in terms of just raw data. So in terms of tire pressures, it seems like there's two areas where there's grip that comes in. So it's not just kind of the higher or the lower. There is kind of like this two peak system that ties in, and it's also impacted, if this makes sense, by your pace. So the front runners, and I won't be throwing any secrets out there, but you can tell if you watch Johnny, Nickel, Tony, myself, a few of the other guys, the first few laps, our tails are quite happy, and typically we're running slightly lower PSI, much more difficult to handle at the beginning, but then the tires tend to come in a bit later on, and the fall off is not as far. So that is one thing to watch out for. So if you wonder sometimes why you see some of us, chances are we're running a bit lower PSI than maybe the rest of the pack. But it's not always the case. Some tracks, and there's the trends that I'll talk about, faster tracks, Bathurst, Watkins Glen, Bathurst, etc., Suzuka, tracks that have higher fast flowing turns, your tire pressures end up have to be a bit higher because the sidewall pressures and loads that are put into the tires. So going very low PSI at these tracks doesn't normally work. But tracks kind of like the Nürburgring GP, some of the super sprints with the tight corners, if there's a lot of hairpins in the track, the trend usually is start off with a very low PSI, 15, 16, 16.5, 17. That'll seem to help. So those are kind of some of the initial trends to work with, but that isn't the case across the board. So don't hold me to that. You still have to do smart testing. So in terms of testing, I like to use 5-6 minutes to 10 minutes of track time. The purpose of this is usually after 10 minutes, and I think Johnny said it before, he usually does 6 laps and then goes ahead and does it again. When you get to around the 10-minute mark, that's when you start to find out if your tires, if you're starting off too high and the fall off's too much, or if you're starting off too low and the temperatures are overheating, the fall off is too much to handle. So you still have to put in the time. You can't just go in there and expect that you're going to, depending how you drive, how the tires are going to go off. Because if you start with a high PSI and maybe you get 1 or 2 really fast laps and you think that that's going to hold out, sometimes the opposite happens. So I think the biggest push and the biggest thing you can do is try a few different pressures. Don't get fixed on one, and then see how they last over 1-2 qualifying laps, but also the length of the race.
Okay, so the old tyre philosophies, there's always been two thought trains. One has been, like you say, the try and set your pressures so that you're running hot pressures of 26 psi or whatever that is in bar or whatever anybody else uses. The other train was tire temperatures. So try not to overheat your tires by letting them go over, I think it was 200 Fahrenheit. Are you saying that you basically thrown that out of the window and you now do it by feel, or is there something that you're looking at in hot pressures and hot temperatures that helps you decide on where to set your cold pressures?
It's a good question, because one of the next points I was
I
going to talk
only
about
ask
it.
good questions.
Both happens. Or high PSI and even say above 200. You're right. 200 Fahrenheit was kind of the benchmark. That was the old philosophy. And the more we've done testing as a team and a group, we find sometimes that you might hit 220 when you go to the garage afterwards, 225. And we've also been doing work with Motec, and when it shows live tire temps throughout the track, and the garage seems to only match the peak tire temps. So it goes back to my earlier point about, are you experiencing fall off? Sometimes you might have 215, 220 Fahrenheit, but you're not experiencing the fall off in terms of lap times, in which case your testing is kind of defunct that 200 Fahrenheit as being the ceiling. If you experience 200 Fahrenheit and you're noticing that the tires are falling off, maybe they're staying at that high temp for too long and they're getting a bit greasy, that's when you'd start looking at changing them. But we're not so much looking at those numbers to say, are we exactly in the ballpark? It's really coming down to putting in the laps and then understanding where the fall off is, when do they occur, does it get to a point where the tire really starts to fall off, etc. So.
Okay. Another question that comes up quite a lot with tire pressures, especially in this series where we have multiple races at different times of day. So, we tend to start off with a morning race, be it a sprint race or a super sprint race. And then we go on to either an afternoon or a late afternoon race where the air temperature and track temperature is higher. Is there something specific that you look for with tyre pressures to change between races?
Throughout the week, the testing, try and do a test with an 85 to 90 Fahrenheit track temp, try and do a 65 to 70 Fahrenheit track temp, and try and see a 110 to 115 Fahrenheit track temp. And that'll start to give you trends as to where you want your tires to be, where you're finding the best results between those, say, a cold, medium, and a hot track. Once you gather that information, then you start to see what you're changing in terms of the pressures and the car to get the most out of it throughout those races. So to go to your question in terms of with the dynamic weather, the morning, you know that the temperature for the most part is going to be going up. Clouds can throw a kink in that. But looking at how much the temperature is changing over time will give you an idea as to what the track might be during your race time. So for example, that if it's track's gone up 10 Fahrenheit in the hour before the race and the race is a half hour, you might expect a 5-degree change on the track going up from during the race time. So if the track was at 70 Fahrenheit, started at 60, you might expect 75 Fahrenheit as the average temp, or 72, 73 Fahrenheit as the average temp for your race. So looking at it that way will usually help, but then clouds and everything can come into play and that can really cool down a track. So it's definitely interesting, but practice comes in.
Do you not have a standard go-to though? If race 1 is a cool track, race 2 is a hot track, would you put the tires up for the second race, or by default, whether how many clicks that may be, or would you always put the tires down? I think that's what he was kind of getting at. That's what I want to know.
Tracks are different. We used to always go up. We used to follow the philosophy of hot track, go up in pressures to get to the 26 psi, not overwork them. But it comes back to the tracks in terms of if they're a bit slower. Sometimes I go down personally in tire pressure.
Because theoretically, the lower the pressure, the higher the temperature. Am I correct in saying that?
That's theoretically that's correct, Johnny. Yesterday in the 3 races, my tire pressures were within a half pound in all 3 races.
And the science behind that, Johnny, I believe, is the less air there is in the tire, the quicker it heats up.
What I found yesterday.
Yeah, I get that. It's what the go-to would be for hotter, because I've had people tell me that if you're on a hotter track, then you have a lower pressure because you want the tire's going to expand more because it's going to get hotter. And then I've had people say you want to put it up because you want the sidewall to be firmer and keep the temperatures down. So it's hard to know what way to go with it. Generally, we just leave it the same.
We generally go higher, Johnny. I won't lie about that. But what I found yesterday was that keeping it around the same pressure allowed the sidewall to be a little bit more flexible in the second race when it was so hot, and ended up giving a little bit more grip.
I suppose it depends on what your starting pressure is, but yeah, it's so you would say you'd normally go up from a cooler track to a hot track.
Right.
Okay. Back to Chris. So there is new tyre model 11,023 on the Skip Barber at the moment. We're all assuming that at some point we're going to get a new tyre on the V8. Whether that's if and when the new V8s ever come out, or whether they will put them on the old car. Is that going to throw everything that you've done out of the window, and you've got to start all over again? And if you do have to start over again, have you got the patience to start all over again?
I think some of the trends will still apply, but from reading into the new tire model, it looks like it's very temperature driven. That they're really going to be modeling more of the temperature and what happens when you overheat a tire, how it changes the compound of the tire, how it will then harden back up in a different molecular configuration as it cools down, and all that's going to be changing grip. So definitely going to be. It's exciting. It's going to take some work to get all our heads around the new tire model when it does come, but definitely we'll put in the time. I enjoy crunching numbers, looking at data, analyzing data, trying to find the best possible performance that our team can get out of it. So I will be sad to see some of the information go. I hope some of it will be applicable, but looking forward to the changes too.
Excellent. So, Johnny, Tony, any other questions on tyres for Chris before we move on?
Yeah, when are you going to explain our tire testing to me?
I have to say we do it on feel as well. I think there's an element of personal preference in there. I'm not entirely sold that there's a right and wrong. I mean, it was mentioned earlier that myself and Nickel did some stuff with the Evolution guys in Scops, and I mean these guys are proper front runners leading the series really fast. We had access to what they were doing, and although I can't give away anything they were doing, I will say that with their tyre pressures on their car setups, I was a second a lap slower than with my tyre pressures on their car setups. And if they put my tyre pressures on their car setups, they were a second a lap slower than if they used their ones, which they were a second a lap faster. So it was bizarre. You know, obviously I changed the tyre pressures to what I liked. I went a second a lap quicker. I told them, they tried it, they went a second a lap slower. So I think there's a lot of personal preference involved in all this as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got to get the right tire pressure with the right setup. I know within NQR we've got
That was the same car setup, identical car setups. All I did was change the tire pressures, and I went a second quicker. I told them, they changed the tire pressures, they went a second slower on identical setups.
Yeah, I think there's some truth in what you say there, Johnny, about setups and tire pressures being a personal feel, and basically how hard you abuse them, because one driver can drive significantly harder than another driver, and the tire pressures will make a big difference.
And what I will say with that as well, not only did it change it massively changed the feel of the car. So I had a lot more feel with a slightly lower tire pressure than what they had. It wasn't hugely different, but it gave me more feel of the car. When I put their tire pressures, I lost all feel of the car. But yet they disagree and thought the complete opposite, and they obviously know what they're doing because they're leading Scops drivers. So yeah, I think it's very personal.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, Chris, thanks for that. For giving us some of your knowledge. Please feel free to stick around for the rest of the broadcast. We're going to move on to a preview of round 6 from Daytona. Now, I made some notes earlier, and the people in here were pretty shit last time that we raced there, to be honest.
hate the track.
It's impossible. Tony's never shit.
Season 4 was the last time we raced. It was an endurance event. It was 56 laps, whereas this one's going to be 90 minutes. And just running through the results, Michael Evdoko actually won the race. Out of the people in here, Chris Jackson, 8th. Tony Kloosterman, 14th. Sam Boozin, 17th. I was 22nd. Where's Johnny? Johnny Brandon, 7th. So
I think that's obvious. Evdoka obviously took everybody else in the race out. The results explain the race.
Yeah, so
I am only joking before I start getting bombarded with complaints. Yeah, that was a joke.
Between the 5 of us, we didn't do very well. How's it going to go this time? We know it's a 90-minute race. The endurance races tend to be a little bit more patient. You guys, especially, Johnny, Chris, and Tony, you guys have been running up the front for a couple of seasons now. I presume you're expecting a lot more out of this race than the last time we raced there?
Well, I would hope so. I think some pit strategy will come into play, and I think a lot of work needs to be done on long run setups. So, we've got 2 weeks. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss about 4 days next weekend. Chris and I are heading to Watkins Glen, so we'll miss that time. But long setup, the long pace setup will be very, very important, I think.
And also time of day. So, we've set this race to start, well, not the race, but the practice session will start late afternoon. So the actual race is not going to start for 3.25 hours. So we're going to be into sunset, maybe darkness for the race. How's that going to change things?
It's a one-time sun, right, or time race?
Yeah, no 8 times this time.
Yeah, I think people would be wise and to do this. Always take a look and see what time the race is going to start. Add in your practice time, and then when you're practicing privately, try and set up a session to be similar to that time to get an idea what the conditions would be like. I think that a lot of people are practicing at times of day that may not kind of replicate when the actual race meetings are.
Yeah. Johnny, what do you think? Tony, I've heard him say on a couple of times that this is probably his second most hated track on iRacing. How do you tend to go here, Johnny?
Hear that. Without sounds like I like all tracks. Me. As far as hated tracks go, the only reason I start disliking tracks is if I've done too many laps around them. So places like Brandon, I get a bit bored. I like all tracks. They're all a challenge. Looking forward to Daytona. We'll just go about it our usual way. Try and find a setup from somewhere that feels okay, feels best, lasts, doesn't fall off too much. And then it's just practice. I think just to give people an idea of the car setup thing. We're not with Evolution anymore, so we don't get all their setups.
But you've got a bank of them.
We've got a few of them. But we rarely use them. I mean, at Alton, I used the Racetech setup. And Foggy used the default setup as well. It just worked on his own one from default, which wasn't a long way from the default car setup.
Yeah, but Foggy's just weird.
But that's what we've intending to do. We did something similar, I think, in round one. I think we both were on a variation from default in round one.
You're
so,
welcome
you
for
know,
that Racetech setup, eh?
That Racetech setup was big for me. But Foggy just started again from default and went his own way, and we ended up pretty close to each other. I think it was very close. I think it was 1,000 between us in our first 2 laps. There was a 1,000 between us in qualifying. So it goes to show, they're completely different setups. But we'll do our normal thing, try and find something. I like the front to be positive. He likes a bit of understeer. And then it's just laps and laps, and try and put some laps in and get a consistency.
I'll have a Racetech setup for Daytona sometime tomorrow afternoon.
Chris, you was numero uno out of your team the last time we raced there. Do you expect the same?
I definitely don't expect the same. I would like to be the same. If I recall, last time we were there, I think there was an incident that took a few of us out, quick repair, and then coming back through the field. But the track is unique. I'm not a fan of the track either, but it's going to create some pretty close racing, even though the track is very long. You can be, I think, a half a second, if not more, off the pace. And if you're smart with your draft, you can make that all up onto the straights. So single lap pace isn't huge unless you break the draft from behind. Then you can start to create a gap. But if people are patient and smart, the whole pack can stay together, which will possibly have some coming togethers, especially into turn 1, which is pretty tricky here. But expect, I think, pretty close racing.
And there's obviously a couple of more difficult corners at Daytona. Turn 1 always springs to mind. You're at full chat and then fully on the brakes trying to get round that sharp and awkward left-hander, and then I don't know what turn it is, but where you go back out onto the oval, there's a bit of a lump there. Any tips for the people out there on how to handle them corners?
Do not lose traction. That is a very tricky corner, but it's one of the most important, especially if you're going to be looking to stay with the person into the chicane, which is probably the best passing opportunity is out of that chicane. So getting that tricky left-hander right, try to straighten it up as much as possible, and try not to get the wheel spin. Everyone wants the heavy right foot, but if you do it there, you lose so much time and you will get passed before the chicane.
And I don't think there's a secret setup that the fast guys have that are just flat over things like that. What Chris is talking about there is just throttle control. It's practice laps and being very good on the throttle control and very careful on the throttle control is what will save you around there, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly true.
I would ask Tony's advice, but he hates the track.
Obviously, I'm shit there, so I don't think that there's any magic to it. Stay out of trouble.
How can you be so fast at one place and then say you rubbish around somewhere else? I don't believe it.
Same way at Spa. Another track that I just dislike. To be honest, and I've said this many times, I don't believe the V8 is a car that should be run on those tracks.
I like it at Daytona. I quite like it at Spa. Why would you say not to run it?
Just my personal preference. I just don't like it. So,
well, if we go back to the Christmas event, both Brandon and Foggy were lightning on the oval. I think Tony struggled a bit, so I think some of the high-speed straight corners do not suit his style.
So perhaps next time we run Daytona, we do the oval instead of the road course.
Wonderful.
A lot of people have actually asked me about that, about putting an oval race into it, but
I think it's good for a fun race, but I don't know about
Talladega. Yeah, okay. No, let's move on.
Just one last thing on Daytona. We do have close racing, and like you were saying, the draft at this track, you can be slow around the corners and then make it back in the draft. everybody's got a fast repair that I'm pretty sure people are going to use. I find the fast repair aspect of the league, especially for the endurance races, part of the tactical challenge on when to use it. Do you carry on running with minor damage, save your repair, that sort of thing? Do you guys have any philosophies, tactics around if and when you have to use your fast repair?
If the car's slow, then you have to use it.
Yeah,
I turn
exactly.
it off at I turn it off at the beginning of the race. I make my decision based on when I'm coming into the pits, whether I'm going to, if it's minor damage. It doesn't appear to slow the car down too much if it's minor damage. It's more if it's front end damage or steering damage that the car is slow, and then you have to use it. But if you got a bump in the back end and you're missing your wing, maybe not so much.
Depends how confident you are of not having another major incident as well, I suppose. But
True.
I tend to save it unless, as Johnny and Tony said, if your car pace is drastically down, then I use it right away. Otherwise, your pit times are so long that you may have 20 to 30 seconds of repair if something happens. That can get repaired during your fuel window. So usually what I like to do is save the fast repair in case you get to that last stint, something bad happens, you get caught up in something that you can be repaired and still finish the race and get your point.
Okay, so that's Daytona done. Let's we'll look forward to that one. Next on my little list, which is now decreasing quite rapidly, is league news. It's just a little bit that I wanted to do for the people that tune in live and the people that watch this back later on in the week, just to let you know what's going on behind the scenes at V8ESC Towers. Sam is probably going to curse me for mentioning this because it puts all the pressure on him. But I had a little surprise a couple of weeks ago. Sam and Dave Jansen desperately wanted to talk to me on Discord. So we jumped on. Basically, what these two jokers have been doing is building us a new website. Now, it's not complete yet. We're not actually going to launch it until the end of the season because we're sort of fine-tuning it, getting the bugs out of it, that sort of thing. But it's it's very clean, very smart looking, very easy to navigate. Built into it is a scoring app. What you guys probably don't realise at the moment is I spend about 4 hours on a Sunday morning manually updating spreadsheets and things like that to get all your scores up to date, all the different championships. Anybody that's been on the website today will now see we've got a stats page because we've got if I have a few people asking me about stats, so I've done quite a few stats on there as well. So that scoring app is going to get me hours back for my life. The other thing that Sam is working on, we announced a couple of weeks ago that we're going to start a driver development program with Johnny and Tony, and hoping to get other people involved in it as well. Sam is working on a booking system for that, so that everybody knows what's going on, when they're fully booked, when you can book them, that sort of thing. So we're basically in the background, we're all beavering away. I'm not really beavering away, I'm just pointing out all the faults with it. But we're trying to automate as much as we can to cut down the admin work, and make the website and the whole league a better experience for all you racers out there. That's it for the league news. We'll go on to the iRacing news now. Big announcement. We had another podcast that Tony's been an avid follower of. This week they had, and I haven't made this up. I see this on a Facebook post. Their guest was Tony Loose Lips Gardiner, and that did make me chuckle. But they've basically said that the TCR Audi is going to be ready for the new build. I know the British sim racers are very excited about that, so they can park the Kia once and for all and jump into the Audi. You guys, Johnny, Chris, Tony, I don't know if you've listened to the podcast, but anything that caught your eye in it?
A couple of things. I think Tony gave a really good discussion around the cars and what's coming. I think they've got 8 or 9 new pieces of content. The working on the improved ping from Australia is going to be welcome, I think, not only across the V8 series, but all series, because we have a lot of competitors from Australia and a lot of the World Championship events. So nice to see that they've been working on that. Barcelona's coming, 3 circuits within the one purchase. One is very short, looks like it'd be an ideal sprint racetrack, and then the F1 circuit and a sort of a hybrid circuit as well. So lots of interesting stuff there. The podcast that I put up with Tony, and then the following one with Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Steve Letarte is also a really good podcast to learn about some of the stuff that has happened within iRacing and development of the tracks, and etc. One interesting thing that they talked about was cost, and Tony Gardner indicated that they were finally profitable, which I would imagine is because there's an awful lot of corporate sponsorship going in there now. But the cost to do the Nürburgring, all in, including scanning and all the artwork and all the rest of the work that had to be done to it, was nearing $500,000, which
I think I've paid for that in hosting.
Maybe. An oval track like Loudon was $250,000, and to scan and build a car and get it right. And some people will argue, obviously, that they'll never get it right, but $80,000 for a car makes $12 seem pretty cheap.
Yeah, you don't actually get to park it in your garage, though, do you, for $12?
No, but that's true.
Johnny, yeah, so, we're talking about iRacing news at the moment. TCR Audi, does that interest you?
Yeah, 100%. We'll be, hopefully, XVR will be back in the BSR racing that. Quite looking forward to. And similarly, Barcelona as well. I think it's a great circuit, so looking forward to that as well. And the layouts are great as well. So I've done a little bit on the different layouts there, and they're all good. So it's pretty exciting. The TCR car for me is the biggest thing.
I don't know whether it's because I don't know, I'm a bit weird, but I'm obviously going to buy this TCR Audi. I've got this horrible feeling that people have banged on about a touring car for so long, and they're going to be disappointed.
Well, it's front wheel drive. There's always disappointment. But it's just a close racing. That's what it tends to give. I mean, I don't think anybody seriously likes the Kia, to be honest, but it is good close racing, to be fair. So it'd be interesting with the TCR. The only problem with it is everyone and their cousin will buy it, and it'll probably be carnage for the first couple of months, the same as when any new car comes out. But yeah, looking forward to that, 100%. And like I say, Barcelona as well. That'd be great. It'd be great in the V8, I think.
Yeah, I agree with the carnage with the TCR. I've said before that if and when they bring the new V8s out, all V8 leagues, and there isn't that many of them, but they're going to swell. And the carnage is going to happen for a while.
I usually avoid any new car for at least a month. But yeah, the temptation will be too great with that TCR. I'll be straight on that.
Yeah. One of the things that Tony just mentioned, and I listened to what what they were saying on the podcast and being a bit of a technophobe, it was all Chinese to me. But the things that they're doing to improve ping rate now, we have drivers in our league from all over the world, and yes, we do get our fair share of net code that we try and warn people about, and we ask people to adapt their driving because of it. But anything that they can do on that side of things has got to help us, surely.
Yeah, we should hope so. They were supposed to make the change yesterday, but I looked at the ping rates in our races yesterday, and I honestly I didn't see a difference. So we'll have to see. I'll watch during some free practice this week and see if there is any difference going forward.
Again, it'd be good. I'm not sure it's going to be a huge change, but then again, and at the same time, you got, it's not just people who are in Australia, people who are in America, people who are in England, and everywhere else around the world. It's what type of internet have those people got? And I myself had, the internet in my property here, and my ping was 40 or something coming through at its best. And then I noticed after a couple of months it was ranging between 40 and 120. And just a quick phone call to somebody who's come out, and he made a few changes, changed something outside, and suddenly it was down to 7. So it's not just what iRacing are doing, is it? It's some people aren't aware of what they've actually got, and it can only help. But I think there's a lot of factors to that I don't think it's going to cure anything. But I think it can only help. I think that'll always be there. Though. I think it's bloody amazing that we can occupy. Not the same piece of track, but very close on the track, and have these races as it is. I think it's amazing.
Well, we've come a long way in 20 years. I remember doing GPL over dial-up. So if you think netcode's bad today, it was really, really bad at that time. The thing I'm looking forward the most, and hopefully we see this in the next few months, is an improved damage model where you can actually rub panels together without it causing a spring-rated or sprung acceleration for incidents. Where we can actually bend some panels or just rub up against each other. That would be excellent.
Yeah, I think that again, then the net code or the ping has a big effect on that as well, because if it's obviously the ping predicts where you are on the circuit, and you can have a small crash if your ping's bad, turns into a big damage because it thinks the crash is a lot worse than it is. So I think they're all relative to each other, aren't they? But maybe the better ping will help that as well as the new damage model. It's iRacing, isn't it? That's what you're paying for. It's not, you don't. Everyone moans about how expensive it is. I don't think it is that expensive. I think, all right, arguably it is the first year because you got to buy the new tracks and the cars. Once you've done that, it's the same as paying the blooming PlayStation subscription every year, really, and buying a new game once a year. And it is a new game every year, iRacing, pretty much. So it's constantly being updated, constantly being moved forward, or very rarely get big problems or bugs that I'm aware of. So I think it's bloody good value for money.
Agreed.
Anything caught your eye, Chris, in the latest podcast? Have you had a chance to listen?
I didn't listen to the first one, but I got to listen to the one with Dale Earnhardt Jr. And what caught my eye was actually how the switch between the racing teams in the real world, how they are using iRacing and how good iRacing is as a training tool. They were talking about NASCAR, other development series, the amount of money that's going into it. It was a validation of the simulation that we all enjoy, but from a team motorsports perspective, and how important it is now moving forward. So the old mentality of it's just a game has really changed from the ground up, from the motorsports as well as development and what we do. So I thought that was actually very interesting to hear with Dale Earnhardt and them.
Junior actually said that he would prefer to practice on iRacing as opposed to the GM Motorsport Simulator. And he indicated one day they were going to a test at Road Atlanta, never driven Road Atlanta in real life, strapped himself into an iRacing Monster Energy car, ran Road Atlanta for 4 hours, and the next day, first session out, matched Jimmy Johnson's times at the end of the previous day's practice. So, and the engineer was just amazed that he had never been at the track before.
I think I could match Jimmy Johnson's times at the moment.
When Jimmy was in his prime.
Right, so that's the iRacing news done. We're trying to keep this short this week, guys. Questions and answers. So we haven't had many in. We've had a good one from JP. Practicing. Do you guys use half fuel, full fuel, low fuel?
Whatever the race length is and the fuel required, that's what I use. So for sprint race, the first race of the day, if it's a 20-minute race, whatever number of laps that translates to, I'll calculate a fuel, may throw in an extra gallon. The car likes to be heavier than lighter anyways, and do it that way. And for the second race, the longer race, I'll do 22.2 gallons, whatever our full fuel is, and practice that way.
Usually, if there's a short race and then a long feature race, we'll just practice with the fuel. The main bulk of practice will be with the 22.2 full fuel. Maybe the last day we'll try it with a bit lower fuel. But if you can get the car working with the full tank of fuel, 9 times out of 10 it's not any quicker anyway, even if you do take a bit of fuel out of it. But if you do take a little bit out, it'll probably still work anyway if you're there or thereabouts and comfortable with it.
Yeah, I have to agree with Tony. I run race fuel. I tried to run quali fuel yesterday, and my qualifying hurt. So I went back to running the full race length fuel. And for me personally, and I think Tony agrees as well, is the car feels usually with a bit of fuel in it feels more balanced. So running low fuel in these cars, I think, takes a lot of practice and knowledge how to get it feel right and be quicker. And I think it's a lot more difficult with a lighter rear end. So typically we run with the race length.
Okay. Question from Lane O'Connor. Around brake balance on a hot track. Is it wise to move the brake balance for a hotter track? And if so, more forwards, more backwards, or do you keep it the same?
Rarely change it.
Rearwards for me. It depends on how you like to run the car. If you like to run the brake bias as far rearward as possible, which we tend to do, although we didn't at Alton Park, that's a whole different story. Then you can, if the temperature's hotter, you can run the brake bias more rearward. Whereas if it's cooler, you need to move it forward slightly to accommodate for that, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but that's the way it works in iRacing. It's much more likely to snap on you and kill you in the cooler conditions with more grip than it will do. It'll be much more progressive in the hotter weather, so you can run it further back a bit.
I typically, and it goes to the point of its preference, is when it gets hotter, sometimes I'll usually keep it the same, or I'll go a little more forward. But I like to run it quite far rearward anyway. If a track in the heat has a very heavy braking zone, then I find going closer towards 50, and it's all trial and error, seems to work. If it's more flowy, then usually we don't have to make a change, or personally, I don't make a change.
Again, I think it comes down to car. Sorry, Tony. I think it comes down to car setup as well. It's what suits your car. You know, if you got a very stiff front end on the car, you can afford to run the brake bias quite. If it's a bit softer, then you have to move it around accordingly.
I think there's some personal preference in brake balance. Chris and I may run as much as 4 clicks difference between us. He tends to like his a little bit more rearward. I like mine a little bit more forward. And I also honestly believe that it has a lot to do with the pedals that you're using. If you don't have very much resistance on your pedals, it may make a difference as to where you're putting your brake bias. I was speaking to a member not so long ago. They were running brake bias in the mid 50s, and I haven't been over 50 in months, so there's a big difference there.
50 for years.
Yeah, 14 of them actually, but no, not over 50% brake bias. So it's, I think a lot of it's personal preference. Here at Olton, I think the further back you went, it was a little bit better.
And while we're talking about brake bias, something that's just popped into my head, do you guys play with brake bias during the race, or do you start with it set and leave it alone for the race?
Rarely ever change it.
I play with it sometimes. Depends on the circuit and depends where I'm starting. Yeah.
I don't change it, but I think I would if I had a better wheel with a proper button box with the buttons that I could easily move it maybe a little bit here and there. I do think there's some time to be gained on really heavy braking zones versus flowy parts. Where me personally, if I can move it forward on those heavy ones and back to where I like it for the rest of the track, I would change it. But right now, I just keep it the same.
Oh, I don't change it corner to corner for heavy zones and things like that. But I'll change it as the tyres, if need be. It's not. I didn't change it yesterday in all 3 races. It was the same for all 3 races. You know, it depends on the track, and I think in the 90-minute endurance at Daytona, I will probably be changing the brake bias in the race at certain points.
Okay, and while we're talking about changing things during the race, Bill, welcome, Bill. He's just popped up with a question. Do you ever change the ARBs during the race?
No.
Yeah, and I may change the front bar or the rear bar 1 click during a race if I need to get a little different feel with it. And generally, that'll be an endurance race where you're going from a full tank to a part tank. But only 1 click.
Yeah, I've never changed the ARB once.
Yeah, and all the questions are flying in now. So we've got Doughboy on the chat, which is Mike Frost. He's saying, what signals make you change the brake bias? Is it seat of the pants feeling, or would you do it if the track clouded over or the sun came out or we went from day to night transition, or is it basically just feel?
I think it's feel more than anything else. If the back end starts slipping out on you quite a bit, you might want to take out the rear bar a little. And the same with the front end. It's just basically feel. It's seal the pants.
Yeah, I must admit, being a mid-pack racer, on the brake bias thing, I usually take Tony's setup and add 3 clicks of front bias to it because I don't like the arse end of the car waving about. But I see so many people go into a hard braking zone and the back end of the car just disappears on them. And you sort of sit there thinking to yourself, dude, just look at your brake bias. Surely you've done laps where you've practiced that exact same scenario. But people just I know in reality most of the time the further rearward you have it, the better. But you've got to do it, as you say, A, for your setup, and B, for your driving style.
Yeah, and people also use, depending on your driving style, like you say, if a rearward bias helps you turn the car into the corner on the brake, blah, 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 but then a more forward brake bias would allow you to brake deeper and harder into the corner. So it's a fine line of what your car setup can accommodate and your driving style. So yeah, and as far as when would I move it, it's just cues through the race. Like if you start locking up the rears, you might need to, as the tires start wearing, might need to move it forward a click. As the tires start getting worn, it's just listening out for lockups, basically.
My suggestion to the guys that are out there listening to this is go to a track with a setup that you're comfortable with. Set the run laps with the setup that you're comfortable with. Then move the brake bias forward 4 or 5 clicks. Do a bunch of laps, see how the car reacts. Then go back and move the bias back 4 or 5 clicks from what you're comfortable with. See what the car is doing, and you'll understand very quickly what adjustment you need to make when you're building a setup.
Excellent. Well, I think there's some really good insights there into brake bias and ARBs. So we're about to wrap the show up. We've done a lot better than last week. We're down to an hour and a half there or thereabouts. But before I wrap up, just go through the room. Johnny, anything else you'd like to mention?
No, all good. No, all good. Looking forward to next week, and it's a real shame to hear Tony's not really looking forward to Daytona. That's very disappointing, saddening to me, as you can imagine. But yeah, looking forward.
And you'll miss me next weekend as well in the sprint races.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, that's a shame. I am only kidding, of course, Tony. It's
of course.
When you're not there.
Yeah.
And Chris is our
race. Anyway, that's another story.
Chris is our special guest. Anything you'd like to mention?
I'd just like to thank you guys for having me on today. Open invitation, anyone listening or watching, if any tire pressure questions, tire questions, setup, etc. I'm open to help. So, cheers.
Well, thank you for your information. Tony, anything from you?
The only thing I'd like to say is I hope the events that transpired yesterday are behind us, and guys take a breath and come back refreshed and with a positive outlook coming forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, at this point, I would ask Sam, but as you know, we don't let him talk. What I'd like to say is, obviously, thanks for watching, listening, even. Or if you're listening tomorrow, thanks for listening in the past. The podcast will now be going to fortnightly, so we're hoping to do it on the Sunday after the main Racetech Cup race. So we should be fortnightly, providing we can get everybody together. And if we can't, we'll just try and get some stand-ins in that may or may not be better, and then we can sack the people that we've got.
I will be here for the next one. Oh dear.
If anybody wants to join in the podcast, if you want to be one of our guests, if you want to come in and talk about things, then get in touch, let us know, because at the moment I'm just picking victims at random. Also, with the questions and answers, you don't have to wait until the night. Chuck us a message on Facebook or Discord. We'll log your questions and they'll come up in the next podcast. So all there is left for me to say is Sprint Series next Saturday. 3 20-minute races from Daytona. Not that much practice for the endurance race, but chance to get a few more laps in the car and a chance to learn the track. Thanks to Sam and EC Racing TV for doing this broadcast. Thanks to my sidekicks, Tony and Joni, I was going to say then. Johnny and Tony, for being here again. And obviously to Chris, our super special guest tonight. Thanks to Racetech for sponsoring the series, and thanks for you guys to tuning in and racing with us and making this league as good as it is. please stick around and enjoy the music. It was hand-picked. And it's good night from all of us. See you in 2 weeks.